First of all, with your permission, I would like to congratulate Muslims from all over the world with the holy months of Ramadan and ask them to mention in their prayers Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, and the success of peaceful talks that will end the war in my country. I regret hearing that President Putin describes negotiations as a deadlock, because we in Ukraine, we want to continue talking with Russia and finding mutually acceptable solution. I'm afraid that these words by President Putin that you mentioned mean only two things: that Russia is not seeking diplomatic solution, that it is seeking more war and more atrocities, which is highly regrettable. It's against people's will, and I'm sure it's also against God's will. President Zelensky is ready to meet President Putin any day, even tomorrow, if President Putin is ready to sit down and negotiate the mutually acceptable solutions. We all understand that President Zelensky is the only man in Russia who makes decisions related to Russia's policy towards Ukraine. So therefore, it's absolutely necessary for two of them, for two leaders, to sit down and negotiate. Unfortunately, so far, Russia has turned down all our invitations to hold such meeting, but we will keep proposing them. Well, you see, the statements coming from Minister Lavrov, they are not helping negotiations, and they demonstrate that Russia lacks goodwill and good faith to negotiate with Ukraine. I have a lot, trust me, I have a lot to say about the way Russia behaves in diplomatic negotiations, but I'm not doing that with only one purpose: in order not to undermine the effort, in order to allow talks to continue and not to provoke the other side to withdraw from from these discussions. So unlike my colleague, I will not criticize Russia for its position in talks. I will let negotiators work and seek solutions. And by the way, the experts of both Russia and Ukraine are seeing each other online as you and I speak. And when it comes to Crimea, well, Ukraine will never recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia that took place in 2014. I think you will not find a single country in the world, including Arab countries, who would recognize if a neighbor would have stolen a piece of land from them. This is beyond recognition. But we understand that de facto Russia is present in Crimea, that de facto it exercises effective control in Crimea, and therefore we need to work with them in this current status. But legal recognition and de facto recognition are two different things. Yes, let me respond to you in this way. There are areas in the life of the world, of the planet, where Ukraine serves as security guarantor. For example, food security. Ukraine is a global food security guarantor. Thanks to the agricultural products exported by Ukraine, prices for wheat, sunflower oil, and many other food items are not rising, and people all around the globe are saved from famine. However, in other areas, Ukraine exists in security vacuum. And this goes for so-called hard security or military security. Because Ukraine is not a member of any defense alliance, doesn't have any bilateral agreement that would defend it. So we are bringing up a simple question. Who can guarantee Ukraine's security, given that we are not members of NATO and we have a neighbor, Russia, who openly attacked us, committed an aggression against us? And this process of identifying first who could provide such security guarantees, and second, what these security guarantees might look like, is exactly what is being discussed on one track between Russia and Ukraine, and on the second track between Ukraine and other countries, partners like the United Kingdom, like China, like the United States, France, who are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So this process is underway, but it's too premature to go into details on it. Well, ideally, we would like to receive a security guarantee similar to the one enshrined in the North Atlantic Treaty, in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, that reads, an attack on one country means an attack on all participants of this treaty. So transferred into Ukrainian reality, that article would read, an attack on Ukraine is an attack on all countries who provided it with security guarantees. This is the perfect case scenario. Another standard for security guarantee could be the following. If Ukraine is attacked, security guarantors will provide Ukraine with all necessary military assistance within, let's say, 48 hours to make it prepared for to repel the attack. So these are the ideas which are being discussed and which are on the table. But as I said, it's too early to go into details and discuss further potential elements, as they are being discussed in closed talks. Well, if the response to any concern one might have in this world is waging a war, killing 180 children, raping children, destroying towns and villages, as Russian army did in Ukraine since the beginning of the aggression, then this is a wrong world to live. Ukraine was pursuing membership in NATO. This is true, but we would not become members of NATO this year or next year. And there was plenty of time to discuss differences between Russia and Ukraine related to NATO. Russia preferred to attack, to launch a war. I would like to say officially that Ukraine never had plans neither to attack militarily Crimea or occupied parts of eastern Ukraine, not to mention the attack on Russia itself. We never pursued any aggressive plans towards Russia. And the issue of NATO was not an urgent, a pressing problem. It was a long-term process, and no one could guarantee whether Ukraine would actually eventually become a member of NATO. But Russia, they still decided to attack. Well, yes, if Ukraine had been taken into NATO in 2008, this war wouldn't have taken place. And because Russia would not dare to attack a NATO member. You have to understand one simple fact. For Russia, NATO is not the reason to go to war. For Russia, NATO is the excuse, the made-up excuse to go into war. Speaking about Germany and France, the positions of these countries are much clearer now compared to 2008. They provide Ukraine with a lot of support. We still have differences on some issues, but in principle, Paris and Berlin are in a much better position towards Ukraine than they used to be. The sanctions that have been imposed since the beginning of the war have been meaningful. The problem with them is that their real impact will be felt in Russia in mid- and long-term perspective. It's true that they already put pressure on Russian economy, but it still has money to finance the Russian war machine and therefore to finance the war. We all understand, Russia understands that, Ukraine understands that, and the European Union understands that depriving Russian war machine of its resources means introducing gas and oil embargo on Russia. It's a painful sanctions for the European Union, as some of its members heavily depend on either Russian gas or oil or both. But this is the real way to stop Russia's war machine from killing and destroying, and this must be done. The question is about the time when it will be done. Yesterday, foreign affairs ministers of the European Union held an initial debate on the introduction of this oil and gas embargo. We will be working with them on this issue. Some other countries, as you know, like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, they already introduced energy embargoes towards Russia. While every nation in Europe is extremely concerned with the Russian open aggression against Ukraine and with Russia's violating fundamental principles on which Europe is built, they are on the one hand keen to introduce sanctions to stop Russia and to punish it. On the other hand, they also mind their national interests, and they cannot do all the sanctions at the same time. Some of them will cause damage on Europeans. Some of these sanctions will cause damage on Europeans as well. But when the European Union introduces these sanctions against Russia, it's acting not only in favor of Ukraine, to support Ukraine, it is also acting to support itself. Because the last thing the European Union wants is the spillover of the conflict, spillover of the war. And to achieve that, Russia must be stopped in Ukraine. So these sanctions are basically mutually beneficial for us, to Ukrainians, but also to Europeans. The sooner we stop Russia, the less damage will be inflicted on Europe. And those who believe that this war is just the problem of Ukraine, they are completely wrong, and they don't understand the history of Europe and the current reality. This war will spill over further deeper into Europe if Russia is not stopped in Ukraine. Well, Mariupol is a besieged city. Inside of the city, there are civilians who are suffering from Russian offensive strikes, and there are also Ukrainian defenders of the city. We, as the government of Ukraine, to our deepest regret, have no access to Mariupol, and we are wrestling our mind, trying to understand trying to find a way to help both civilians and our army units in the city. And one of the ways to achieve that is, of course, to have a reinforced air force. And we need planes, military planes, more military planes, so to say. And this is not what we are getting so far from our partners. We are ready to buy them. We are ready to take them for free, but we need them. We need them to save people's lives, both civilian and military lives. The problem is with the way Russian army fights a war in Ukraine is that it does so in a very similar way to Syria. You may recall that in Syria, Russian Air Force was actively used to destroy entire cities and villages before ground forces would move in. The same tactics is being used in Ukraine, and in fact, a former commander of the Russian army in Syria was recently appointed as commander of Ukrainian army, of the Russian army in Ukraine. So this means that more damage, more civilians will die, more cities will be destroyed because of the Russian indiscriminate military attacks. Please come to Ukraine and see everything with your own eyes. I'm sure that after visiting my country and seeing how it was destroyed by the Russian army, you will have no doubts whom to believe. I literally invite everyone interested to come here and to see with their own eyes the cities destroyed entirely by Russian bombings, to speak with the survivors of systemic rapes by Russian soldiers, to see how Russian army attacks Ukrainian cities and villages in eastern Ukraine as this battle unfolds. We live in the world of propaganda where everyone can explain anything, but the best evidence you can get is seeing with your own eyes. The initial plan of Russia in Ukraine was to take entire country under control within maximum 3 days. This plan definitely failed. The initial plan of Russia in Ukraine implied that by now Kiev, where I'm speaking from, would have been already under Russian control. This plan failed. This is why Russia realized that it has to focus to change its objectives, to amend its plans in Ukraine, and it was forced to withdraw its army from Kiev and send it to Donbas, to eastern Ukraine, where the largest battle is unfolding as we speak. So Russia is adjusting its goals to reality on the ground and immediately claims that everything goes according to the plan. Once the initial plan fails, Russia says, okay, everything goes according to the plan. But that's only because they changed the plan, but they're not telling anyone about that.